Hey everybody, how's it going? Thanks for stopping by. Great to see 3 people here already. Can everybody hear me? Justin, I see your question. I'll get to that in a little bit. I hope everyone's doing really well. Having a good night. Enjoying the first full week post-Canadian election. Of course, because we're in a minority government, there's going to be a lot more day-to-day attention on electoral politics here in Canada. During majorities, we all seem to sort of forget from week to week sometimes, unless a big thing is happening, like the SNC scandal. We sort of just take for granted. During minorities, it's been a while since we've had one. There's a lot more day-to-day focus. Even though the Liberals have a pretty stable minority, there's just so much happening right now in federal politics here in Canada that there's a lot to talk about, right? Justin Trudeau still got to form his cabinet. It's going to be really interesting. Does he put a senator in for Alberta/Saskatchewan? Does he try to get a floor crosser from the Conservatives? Does he go with Nenshi from, Calgary? Like, who knows what he's going to do? Does he just not appoint a person from Alberta, which is his prerogative? There's no guarantee that any particular province or region has to cabinet representation. So these are all big questions. Of course, he's going to make it a gender balanced cabinet again. But what does that entail? Who gets demoted? Who gets promoted? Who are the new stars? Who are the people who are left on the outside? These are all big questions that we're going to be getting. In addition to all that, we could talk a little bit about Peter McKay's comments on Andrew Scheer, which are incredibly important to point out. At least at first, even during the election, you guys saw this, I talked about it on the channel, that a lot of people were floating Peter McKay's name. He was a former leader of the PCs before the merger with the Reform/Alliance, and played a big role in Stephen Harper's government. He was a key cabinet minister, seen as the future of the party in some ways. But in a lot of ways, he took a step back after 2015, didn't run again. And a lot of people thought, well, this guy's fairly young. He's ambitious. This is a temporary, vacation. He knows he's going to lose in 2015. He doesn't want to have a loss on his record. He's going to jump away, right? He's going to jump away, and he's going to come back with a new chance. And at first, it looked like he was going to be conciliatory and not really attack Scheer. Right after the election, he was very quiet and said that, I still support Andrew Scheer. But just today, he basically said that Scheer's election failure was the equivalent of missing an open net breakaway, which tells me that at the very least, he's going to be openly critical of Scheer. Now, if that's to help him or not, we don't know yet. But when you combine that with the chances of him being the next leader, which I'd say are pretty good, you have to feel that maybe he's angling. Almighty, you say that you don't like how people portray him as a centrist. I mean, I would agree. I would agree that he's not really a centrist. I mean, Justin Trudeau is center-right. And from my perspective, the Liberal Party's the center-right party. The Conservatives are to the right of that. But relative to the Conservative leaders we've seen over the last 10 years and more, he is relatively moderate. And again, in politics, perception is reality, right? Perception is reality. And if he's perceived as a centrist, then he sort of is one from like the popular perspective. And I honestly think that the Conservatives need to learn a couple things from this election, which is that the West is theirs. They can sort of take the West for granted more. I know that sounds cynical, but like they have the West. The West are theirs. Alberta and Saskatchewan. They might lose a couple seats there, but the provinces are mostly theirs. They need to pick a non-Western leader who can appeal to Maritimers and Quebecers and Ontarians. And Peter McKay, better than most Conservatives that have any sort of name recognition, is set up for that task. Yeah, like Off-Grid says, an East Coast Conservative may turn the tide. Conservatives in the Maritimes are not as right-wing as Conservatives everywhere else. And in some provinces, the PCs are to the left of the Liberals from time to time. The most right-wing party in Nova Scotia for a long time has been the Liberals. And the PC party in PEI, for instance, where they have a minority government, isn't at all like the PCs you see under Ford or the UCP under Kenny. I'm not making them out to be progressives, but it's just in Atlantic Canada, there's the conservative parties are not super right-wing parties or are not seen as such. And I think that that kind of leader from Atlantic Canada will not only help them win more Atlantic Canadian seats, but would, for instance, help them get more attention in Ontario. Again, for the Conservatives to win, as you saw in this election, they don't need to do crazy good in Ontario. They just got to do not bad. If they could win another 15 seats in Ontario and Quebec, and they take those predominantly from the Liberals, then it's a tie election, right? So it's like, if they can do just a little bit better and take 20 from Quebec and Ontario and from the Liberals, then they have a minority government. And then, so and then if you say, okay, we'll add in the fact that Nova Scotia conservative leader who's very popular in the province still might win you most of the Nova Scotia seats except for the ones in Halifax, let's say. Add another 3 or 4 seats there, all flipped from the Liberals. That's an 8-seat gain. When your goal is to pass the Liberals, every seat you take from the Liberals is a 2-seat gain. So it's like, I can see why a lot of conservatives are, look, we had Harper, he was from Alberta. We have Scheer, he's from Saskatchewan. We need somebody not from the prairies. We need somebody not from our traditional, bastion. Those people are already ours. We need somebody who's going to appeal to new people. I think that's why Peter McKay is going to be a big favorite to be the next leader. So just Brianna is here, guys. Brianna is here. She was just a few minutes behind, but she's here. She's got a little bit of candy. Oh, quick question. We're going to get to this one. Bree's going to start handling questions. I have to answer Justin's about Corbyn. We'll talk a little bit about the UK election, and we'll get to some questions. But what's your guys' favorite Halloween candy / least favorite one? Let us know in the comments. That's a good one. People have always told me to tell you this. To help with the stream, it helps if you guys like the stream. When you come in and you see the like-dislike thing, click the like button. It helps to show it to more people. If you have anybody you think might be interested, drop the link in, Facebook or Twitter or, on wherever, and let people know that we're streaming, talking Canadian politics, talking American politics, talking British politics. Couple other things to note. Again, this was mostly focused on Canadian politics during the election. But as we move away from the election, I want to talk a bit about Britain, which is going to go through an election, as well as the U.S., which is in their perpetual election cycle that they always have. A couple more things about leadership. This is another thing that should worry Scheer, is that there was a poll out today that asked Canadians in general and party loyalists about all the party leaders, do you think that leader should or should not resign? And so for every leader, they had more support than they're less than 50% thought they should resign, with the exception of Andrew Scheer, where Canadians were just a little bit more likely to say, yes, he has to go. Fine. But that's just Canadians. The most popular leader to stay on was Jagmeet Singh. He had about 75% support from Canadians. Canadians really like Jagmeet Singh, even if they weren't ready to vote for him this time. But when you ask party loyalists, most of the parties do quite well. Jagmeet and Trudeau have like 93% support. Blanchette has 99% support. But Scheer doesn't even have 70% support. And many, many times when you have these leadership reviews, 70% is often seen as the number you need to hit to avoid any kind of controversies. Any lower than 70, you might technically have the right to stay on because you're above 50%, but a lot of people will say that you've lost legitimacy because a significant portion of your own party wants to see you go. And Scheer, with the polling that I've seen, and this includes another poll, is falling in that direction. Brianna, if you guys heard a little clink there, that was a Reese's piece hitting the ground and bouncing.
Stop outing me. My God. Okay, what question are we on?
If you just want to go through questions, we haven't really seen done any questions yet.
Did you answer Drew M's question on what hockey team you
Yeah, not yet. I am a Leafs supporter. I know. Watch that number, collapse. But I'm a Leafs supporter, and right now I'm wearing my TFC jersey because I love you guys so much that even though it's the 2019 MLS Cup semifinals right now, Toronto versus Atlanta. I'm here with you guys. So again, update Brianna on the score of that game, especially if Toronto's winning, and then she can let everybody know if you're following that.
Question from Justin Frederick.
Yeah.
What are Corbyn's chances of winning the election?
That's a great question. So just for a backgrounder for people who don't super follow British politics, there's going to be a British election on December 12th. Much like our system, they don't have the long winding elections. They do like that 6-week kind of election sprint. And in that election, there's basically the main parties are, the Conservatives under Boris Johnson. There's Labour under Corbyn. There's also the Lib Dems, which are sort of like the Liberal Party in Canada, but they're a third party. There's the Scottish National Party, which is sort of a Scottish sovereigntist party. And there's a whole bunch of other smaller parties, including the Brexit Party. UKIP still exists. They have way more parties than we do, way more. Like we have 5 major parties, 6 if you count the PPC. They have like 8 or 9 parties that could all win seats in this election. But of course, the 2 main contenders for prime minister are Boris Johnson, who's currently prime minister but has never won an election. He's never run one, and Corbyn, the leader of the opposition. Right now, the polls indicate that the advantage leans to the Conservatives. That's what the polls on aggregate indicate. But there's a few things that could help Corbyn, which is that I think a lot of the non-conservative vote will coalesce around him, except maybe in Scotland. But that's not a big deal because those Scottish seats will be largely taking conservative votes. And I think that a lot of people would be willing to make Corbyn prime minister in a minority because Corbyn has pledged a people's vote. And so the Lib Dem position is they want to just repeal Brexit. They want to say, screw the voters of the referendum. We're just going to not listen to the voters of this country. Whether you like Brexit or not, they did win a narrow mandate for Brexit. The Corbyn position, I feel, is much more tenable. Corbyn has said, we're going to get a deal, and then we're going to have that deal voted on. Because at the end of the day, what was promised in Brexit was not what the Conservatives have delivered. And so at the very least, the people deserve another vote once the deal is finalized. And I think that that's Corbyn's position. And relative to the Conservatives, which support Brexit, that'll be something that hopefully all the non-Brexit parties can rally around. And I think that Corbyn has shown himself to be a strong campaigner. And I won't say that, he's the favorite, but I will say that the polls vastly underestimated him last time. And no Labour leader has swung more seats in one election than Corbyn has since Clement Attlee in 1945. Whether it was enough to win or not last time in 2017, no Labour leader won as many seats back in one election as Corbyn did. He had the most successful campaign in modern British history in that regard. So don't count Jezza out.
The Almighty Huge says, I kind of hate how they present him as a centrist.
Oh, yes, with Peter McKay. Yeah, we talked about that. Yeah, no, certainly. And again, like whether or not you believe he's a centrist or you feel that it's like, that's a fair characterization, I think that's what he's going to be seen as, at least in the relationship to other conservatives, especially given that the party is increasingly dominated by MPs from the West who are more conservative. And so if he comes out, running like a lot of maritime PCs do, he will be seen as a moderate. And on some issues, then, he might not be all that different from Justin Trudeau. For instance, you might see Peter McKay march in pride parades. You might see Peter McKay make an open stance that he's pro-choice. You might see him be able to make these moves. Whether Canadians believe him as genuine or not, that's a whole nother question. But he might make those moves when Scheer just wouldn't or felt he couldn't.
Okay, Craig Adolph is here.
Craig, how's it going?
He says, care to go off on Elizabeth May for attacking Singh on climate change today?
Yeah, I mean, I noted this on Twitter. May is clearly still in election mode, and she's mad because Jagmeet Singh said today, like, what are your priorities? And I think Singh said clearly that he has 2 immediate priorities, which is 1, ensuring that those Indigenous children get the money owed to them, and 2, starting the process towards a national pharmacare program. And Elizabeth May interpreted that to say that Jagmeet Singh is abandoning climate. which I don't think is fair. Jagmeet Singh made climate change one of his main priorities during the election. That's undeniable. And I think that it's very clear that Jagmeet is being reasonable and pragmatic. Here's the thing. The Liberals and Conservatives support pipelines. 100%. Even Elizabeth May has been unclear about her position on Alberta tar sands. At times, she said she supports it. At times, she says she doesn't. So if the Liberals and Conservatives agree on something, guys, it's going to get done. 100%. This is why electoral reform shouldn't be a priority for Singh right now. Like, in terms of talking about electoral reform, 100%. But in terms of what he feels he can get realistically done in this parliament, it's not those things. Because the Liberals and Conservatives, when united on an issue, are unstoppable with the parliament as structure. But there are a couple issues where Liberals and Canadians in general have been polled, and they strongly support the NDP position. And if you guys saw one of my recent videos, you saw that basically 80% of Canadians support a universal pharmacare program. And so Singh going on that issue, and again, whether Trudeau was genuine about it, Trudeau ran on pharmacare. So when you combine the fact that Trudeau ran on pharmacare and Singh ran on pharmacare, and you combine the fact that it's extremely popular, and Canadians said they want universal pharmacare, which is the NDP plan, not the Liberals' piecemeal plan, then I think it's a very good strategy. Because Singh can go to Trudeau and say, look, you have a mandate for pharmacare. I have a mandate for pharmacare. Polling indicates that 90% of Liberals and 80% of Canadians want pharmacare. So let's do pharmacare. And if you're not doing pharmacare, what is that saying to all the Liberals who voted, all the people who voted for you, whether it was strategic or whether because they believed in your platform? Whereas opposing the pipeline, as much as I agree, like, guys, we got to be, Justin Trudeau has a mandate for that. Like, he ran on pipelines, so did Scheer. They have they won that, those two parties won well over half the vote and have well over 2/3 the seats. They have a mandate for that pipeline, as ecocidal as it is. So I think it's like, you got to pick your priorities. And like, again, Elizabeth May, she has supported the tar sands. Her vision for Canadian energy is to use dirty Alberta oil for the foreseeable future. That's from Elizabeth May.
Okay, so Craig.
Also, one other thing. I don't know if Craig's. Elizabeth May also wants to be Speaker of the House, which is absurd. I don't know if you guys saw that. She wants to be Speaker of the House. That would be an awful, awful idea.
Okay, Craig's funny. He says, you said May was still in campaign mode, but I argued that she didn't seem to start until sometime after October 21st, unless you count her campaign for JWR.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. I mean, they certainly were trying stuff. I don't know if you could call it a campaign given the level of organization they're in.
Okay. So sorry, I said that Drew M had asked about the hockey team. It was actually Aiden Blum, and I haven't even seen Drew M here tonight, so I don't even know.
You just made that. You just made that one up. Yeah.
I made it. Okay. So we have another question here from Dan Cordovan. He says, I have a question about Confederation. Is cap and trade a provincial issue or a federal government issue?
In general, and okay, for as far as confederative powers go in Canada, we have a general rule. There's Section 92 and 93 of the British North America Act, and those delineate in general terms what powers are provincial and what powers are federal. And I believe 92 is federal and 93 is provincial, or the other way around. But in a lot of ways, we have a system where if it's unclear, the power devolves to the federal. Whereas in the US, if it's unclear, the power devolves to the provincial. And in general, when an issue is seen to be happening largely within the borders of one province, it's provincial. So education, healthcare, a lot of these things, the conduct of municipalities, these are largely provincial, right? Labor law. But there are exceptions when something crosses provincial lines, and then it becomes federal. So think about banking, telecommunications, military, Indigenous affairs, transportation between provinces like railways. All of these industries are federally regulated. So if you're a worker, for instance, and you work at McDonald's, you're covered under provincial labor legislation. And if you work for a railway, even if you only work in one province and you don't travel between them, odds are you're federally regulated. Same thing with workers that work as a bank teller, or if you work for Air Canada, for instance, because it's aviation.
Telecommunications.
Yeah, telecommunications, as Brianna noted. And so with environment, it's often argued that with regard to environmental issues, cap and trade, the ownership and production of natural resources is provincial. A province owns the natural resources within its borders and can do with those what it pleases. But as soon as something crosses a provincial boundary, be it a pipeline or a railway, all of a sudden it becomes federal in jurisdiction. And the argument is, and I believe this is a fair argument, because I think the Supreme Court is largely sided with the Trudeau Liberals on this, is that the environment is of national concern, and therefore things like a national carbon tax or cap and trade imposed on provinces is perfectly constitutional, because the federal government has a responsibility to the broader environmental health of the country, and it can choose what to do with regard to environmental policies like cap and trade and like carbon taxes. So, for instance, hypothetically, the Greens or the NDP form a national government. We can't tell the Alberta government to stop extracting tar sands. We don't have that authority. Those are their resources. But we can we cannot give them the right to import or to export that tar sand oil via train or pipeline, because that is federal in jurisdiction. And so that's where the complications come in. So in general, the courts have seemed to side with the federal government, saying they have the right to impose a carbon tax or other such systems on provinces that refuse to take them. And I would largely agree with that viewpoint.
He also says that candy corn is the worst candy. And I would agree, with the exception of the toffee that sticks to your teeth and it feels like you're going to pull them out when you eat it.
Yes, if you missed the first part of that, Brianna says that, yes, indeed, candy corn is the worst candy, with the possible exception of that gross kind of Halloween taffy that's very sticky and actually isn't really good taffy. So, yeah, that's a good one, yeah.
Okay.
I would agree.
Next question. The Almighty Huge says, do you know what the Lib Dems are supposed to be? I think in terms of political compass.
Yeah, so they're like the quintessential socially progressive, economically conservative. That's generally what they would be. They have some libertarian tendencies. They're often the party of like a certain kind of upper middle class educated professional. They're sort of like the Liberal Party, if the Liberal Party was reduced to let's say in an alternative universe in 2011, 2015, the NDP forms a government and the Liberals are reduced to an even smaller third party. Let's say the Liberals get 20, 30 seats. Think about where those 20 or 30 seats would be. Very likely highly educated cities in Canada, certain neighborhoods, upper middle class neighborhoods in Toronto and Montreal and Vancouver, and maybe some outposts here and there. That's the Lib Dems. And other things is that they are the most anti-Brexit party, because within Labour and the Conservatives, you have divisions on this. Within the Conservative Party, you have pro-Brexit and anti-Brexit forces, and the same thing in Labour for different reasons often, right? But in Lib Dems, I don't think there's a single figure of any importance that supports Brexit. They're very much like a kind of like neoliberal capitalist party. Even more so than the Conservatives in some ways. So that's the Lib Dems. That's what they exist as. They've gotten an uptick in popularity because they've been a clear anti-Brexit party, but they're still the third party nationally. And much like the NDP, they're probably the fourth party in terms of seats, because the Scottish National Party has the benefit of concentrating all their votes in one part of the UK.
Okay. Diami says, Manitoban here. I'm curious as to why the northern regions of Manitoba is NDP voters, but the southern portion of Manitoba, excluding portions of Winnipeg, are conservative.
Yeah, that's a great question. In general, in most of the country, rural areas vote conservative. Occasionally, they might vote liberal, but that's only in places like the Maritimes or in a very, very, very big liberal win. They won a couple rural seats they had no business winning in in 2015, but that's because they won a big majority. In general, those seats go Conservative, but the NDP in northern areas where there's a strong Indigenous and or working class base, they tend to do reasonably well. Not in every part of the country. Like in northern Alberta and Saskatchewan, they largely went Conservative this time, but those seats can go NDP. So look at provinces. So in Northern Ontario, for instance, there are Indigenous communities that are more likely to vote NDP, and there's mining and lumber worker communities that tend to be unionized or relatively unionized, and they vote NDP. So it's not a surprise that in a lot of northern communities, there's a lot of NDP support. There's also public sector workers. Public sector workers are both unionized, but also the NDP is kind of seen as a consistent supporter of public services. So the NDP does very well in northern areas like Manitoba and Ontario specifically. So when you look for like, where is the Ontario NDP strongest? They're strongest in like certain parts of downtown Toronto. They're strong in Hamilton and other working class towns in the south. And they're strong in the industrial communities and northern communities in the north. Like, you know, like Charlie Angus's seat, for instance, is Timmins, but it's really like it's Timmins and the entire north around it, which is one of the reasons why Charlie Angus is such a champion of Indigenous people. It's not just that he's passionate about it. That's probably the biggest reason, but it's also that a sizable proportion of his constituents are Indigenous people.
Okay, Off-Grid Wannabe says, what do you think? What would you think if the NDP voted for the pipeline in order to get healthcare? Would Jagmeet look bad?
Yeah, that would probably look bad, but Jagmeet doesn't need to do that, right? Like the pipeline's happening. The pipeline is gonna happen, guys, unless like the courts rule. Like the only thing that could stop it is like a Supreme Court ruling or Indigenous nations, are effectively able to make a case that it violates treaty rights. Other than that, though, the political will is there. And this sucks to hear, but the average Canadian wants that oil pipeline. They want to lay some pipe, like the average Canadian. No, but they do that. If you guys hear that, that was the slogan of the Alberta Liberal Party. They wanted to lay some pipe. But that's the political reality, guys. It's gonna happen, and so Singh should speak out against it and should talk about how it's bad, 100%. But in terms of political capital, he doesn't need to spend any there. The Liberals and Conservatives will force the pipeline through, and Singh needs to save his energy on those issues that he can find wedges in, where Liberals support his position very clearly and where he can point out inconsistencies in Trudeau's campaign. And I think pharmacare is a vital one. Pharmacare is extremely popular, even with Conservatives. Trudeau ran on it, and I think Trudeau ran on it with the intent to not do anything about it. But now he's got a minority, and he might be stuck. And so if Singh is able to convince people that pharmacare is a good thing, that public pressure could force Trudeau to play ball with Jagmeet.
Okay, the Almighty Huge says, what do you think of the EU in general?
I mean, I'm not like this big, like, I know in this, like, in our times now, because like you got to pick sides, and like because the Brexiteers are generally seen as awful people, I've seen a lot of even Canadian leftists be like rah 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 EU. But the EU is to some degree a key instrument in the neoliberalization of many European countries. So I wouldn't say I'm like a big fan of the EU as it exists. And so much like Jeremy Corbyn, you might call me a skeptic of the EU. But in this current context, if I had a choice, I would be against Brexit because I don't see the alternative as any better. But on the other hand, maybe the EU could be transformed in a more socialist direction. And, maybe the eventual goal of a socialist Europe would be something like what the EU is, or at least the EU could be. So, I mean, I'm skeptical of the EU project. I do see it as probably causing harm to a lot of working class people in certain countries because the mechanisms for protection aren't there. Again, conversely, however, in some countries like the UK, it's probably led to better labor laws. It's a very complex question. So I'm skeptical of the EU, much like I'm skeptical of a lot of free trade deals. But on the whole, if I was a British citizen on, Brexit voting day a couple years ago, I would have definitely voted against Brexit. That's my view.
Although it does allow for the free movement of labor as capital.
Yeah, and that's a good point. One thing that Brianna made, I don't know if people heard you there, but Brianna made a great point where she basically said that, say, unlike NAFTA, which allows capital to move freely but not labor, at least the EU to some degree does allow that free movement of both. And that does create opportunities for some people, but for others, it creates, it devalues their labor. And so the benefits of free trade exist, but they're not always equally shared, and they're not always and the pains of free trade are not equally borne by everybody, and that's a major issue.
Okay. Claudia Holding says, what do you think Trudeau will accomplish in his second term?
I mean, that's a great question. I think that, he's going to get that pipeline done. I think that's going to be something he's going to get done. He's going to get he's going to get his tax cuts that disproportionately help upper, not the wealthiest people, but almost wealthiest people, and don't do a whole lot for low income people. He's going to get that done. He's probably going to see the free trade deal with Mexico and the U.S. formally ratified. It's still happening in the U.S. That'll probably get done because the Conservative Party will largely agree with his general positions. Beyond that, it really depends what he's willing to do. I think that in a lot of ways, if Trudeau, if Trudeau was really the progressive we think he portrays himself as, he would see this opportunity to work with the NDP as a good one, and that he could get a lot of policies passed. Trudeau has such an opportunity to work with the NDP to pass and make Canada such a better country. Like, again, that video I did earlier this week or late last week, which was that, like, the average Canadian, like, supports the NDP's program overwhelmingly. They want pharmacare. They want dental care. They want 500,000 housing units. Even though maybe some support the pipeline, they still want something like a Green New Deal. And even a slim majority, Canadians are divided here, but a slim majority want proportional representation. And so when you add all of that up, what you see is that Canadians want the NDP platform, and 90% of Liberals, literally, I'm not making this up, like 89-90% of Liberals want a coalition. They want Trudeau to form a formal coalition with the NDP to basically create a 4-year majority of the Liberals and NDP working together. And Trudeau's not going to give them that. And so I think it's going to be a really disappointing 4 years, because the Liberal voters, 43% of them were strategic voters, and they want what Jagmeet Singh and the NDP were offering. And I don't think Trudeau's going to give them even a sliver of that. So I don't know what his overall goals are going to be, but I can't imagine they're going to be all that ambitious, given that he didn't really run on much this election. Think about it. What did Trudeau and Scheer run on in this election? They ran on a tax cut that overwhelmingly benefits upper income people, and they ran on a pipeline. And that's largely what they ran on. And Trudeau might get some gun control legislation passed. Like, that might be a thing. But, like, there's not going to be a whole lot done of note. And it's sad, because Trudeau has that opportunity to work with the NDP to make something happen.
Okay, Zachary Gallivan says, I think I've been saying his name wrong the entire, all the streams.
You might have been.
Yeah. Said, did you watch the stream tonight with Matthew Green and Abby Lewis?
I didn't have the opportunity to see that. I'm sure that was great. Matthew is, of course, the new MP for Hamilton Centre for the NDP. He's going to be a left-wing voice on the party, 100%, and unashamedly so, and I'm happy to see it. Matthew, for those who don't know, has been a guest on my channel. We did an interview together before the election started, where we talked about his campaign. We talked about the Green New Deal. We talked about economic democracy. It's a great chat. Go and check that one out. This is a man who, if you look at how he talked, he's like, yeah, this is exciting that this is a man going to Parliament. And if you saw, he's already putting his money where his mouth is. One, if you noticed, Matthew is doing these really great, like, live stream / live hit videos where he's, like, talking about becoming an MP and talking about his first days as an MP, and it sort of made the process accessible. Like, what are the first couple days of a new MP like as they, get elected for the first time? They go to Ottawa, and like Matthew did that, and it was super cool to see. But if you guys saw, there was a group of young, almost exclusively young people protesting for climate action at Parliament Hill, and they were all kicked out of Parliament Hill and basically had to go to the sidewalks outside because they protested, in the formal government space. And Matthew was one of the few people, I think Laurel Collins, again, another new NDP MP. Matthew was one of the only people that actually went outside to meet with them and hang out with them and talk about their concerns and let it be known that he supported their protest and what they were and the actions they're taking. And I think that that's a really good sign that we have a strong MP and a pretty safe NDP seat. So he knows he can lay down some roots, and he is going to be a special candidate. You guys know, I have confidence in Jagmeet to be leader of this party, but I think that Green is going to be taking a leadership role in this party. Look for him to get a very important critic role or to be given a very crucial role in helping the party win some key seats back.
Okay, so a bit of a discussion going on. Alvin Careless, voted NDP in a conservative stronghold.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's a bit of talk about voting strategically and whatnot. But then he said, he said that if we had restored the per vote subsidy, then no vote would be a wasted vote. What are your thoughts on that?
I think that's a great point. I have noted that to people before, and I've still seen some people say that, and it hurts that I have to correct them because they're like, it's okay, you can vote Green or you can vote NDP or you can vote Liberal or Conservative in a no chance riding because at the very least your candidate will get a couple of bucks. And I'm like, unfortunately, that's not how it works. Harper killed the per vote subsidy and Trudeau never brought it back. And so it's a system is designed to primarily support the two big parties of big business and of wealthy people, and that's the system as it exists right now. Maybe that's an avenue for the NDP to work with the Liberals. I think it would be interesting if the NDP could get campaign finance reform that you could convince the Liberals it hurts the Conservatives more than it hurts the Liberals. So let's say the NDP got Justin Trudeau to agree to an $800 maximum yearly donation, down from $1,600. And the Liberals are like, okay, yeah, this is going to hurt us, but it's going to hurt the Conservatives more. But it'll make it look like we're being nice to the Greens, NDP, and Bloc. Maybe we'll do it. So maybe that's an opportunity for cooperation. If Trudeau can be convinced that making the elections more equal narrows the fundraising gap between the Liberals and Conservatives, because the Conservatives raise more money than the Liberals. At least they did in this election. In terms of voting, guys, like this is going to sound bad, but here's the thing. In terms of a progressive government, we needed more Conservatives to beat Liberals. That sounds counterintuitive, but 10 or 15 extra Conservative MPs right now mean a more progressive government. Really, 100%. Because the part of the problem with this minority is that Justin Trudeau is like 30 seats ahead of the Conservatives. And Justin Trudeau is only 13 seats or so away from a majority. And to stop the Liberals, no two parties have enough votes to add up to beat them. The two other biggest parties, the Bloc and the Conservatives, are about 2 or 3 seats short, I think, of adding up to what the Liberals have. So if we're being 100% honest, all of these people who are like, I live in a Liberal Conservative swing riding, I needed to vote Liberal to stop the Conservatives. Well, guys, if I'm being honest, if you would have voted NDP and a Conservative won, we would have had a weaker Liberal Party, more dependent on us for support. And so one more random Conservative troglodyte on the backbenches, whether you think they're good or not, like it didn't really matter. It's better to have that Conservative in the House of Commons than have a Liberal there that gives Trudeau more bargaining chips. 100%. I don't care how bad that sounds. That's how stupid our system is. Our system is so stupid that it's better to elect bad people so that they're closer to the less bad people so that the good people have more leverage. So honestly, if I've had hindsight in this election and I lived in one of those ridings, guys, it might make sense to vote strategically, to vote Conservative instead of voting NDP in some of these ridings, to elect a Conservative to stop the Liberals from getting close to a majority. That's how ridiculous our system is. So, like, and I know hindsight is 2020, but at the end of the day, like, we needed more Conservatives to win. If, like, unless the NDPers could win those seats, we needed some more Conservative wins. That would have made for a much weaker Liberal movement and give us much more power.
Okay, maybe those thoughts need to be refined.
Brianna says maybe those thoughts need to be refined, but let's like look at the numbers. If let's say in the 905,
okay, we have other questions.
I know, but like let's say in the 905, guys, where the NDP has like no real chance in most of the 905 ridings, the Conservatives won 5 more seats from the Liberals. That would mean that there's a 10-point swing, and so that the Conservatives now would still be down from the Liberals, but the Liberals would be 20 seats away from a majority, and the Conservatives and Bloc would be enough to override Justin Trudeau. So he would need the NDP more regularly. So I don't care that a particular, Liberal lawyer beat a Conservative lawyer. I don't care, right? I don't. What matters is that the Liberal-Conservative gap shrinks to make the Liberals more precarious. It's a system stupid, guys.
Justin Frederick says you need a Reese's Pieces. I should go get you one. Okay. Another one from Zachary. He says, what do you think Corbyn needs to do to be successful for the general election?
I mean, he needs to hammer home his vision for Britain, which is like a vision of economic democracy, of challenging the economic status quo. He needs to sell that vision to the working class person that supports Brexit. There's a lot of working class people in like key labor conservative swing parts of the country that are leaning conservative because they support Brexit. And Corbyn needs to let those people know that, one, if Corbyn wins, they'll get a people's vote. They can still go in and vote for Brexit. Corbyn is open about that. And two, that with Corbyn, he needs to let them know that the reason they're struggling isn't primarily because of the EU, even though the EU might have issues, but because of inequality and because of the divide between rich and poor, and because there's a class of people who exploit them, and because there's their children don't have the same opportunities that the children of the wealthy have in Britain, and on and on and on. And he needs to hammer that home. He needs to go to those Brexit working class voters and convince them that even if Brexit does matter to them and they support it, that there's more important issues like the National Health Service, like better labor laws, like renationalizing key industries, which is a popular position with a lot of those voters. And I think that that's where he needs to go. And I think one key factor is he's got to get young people to the polls. The young people like him. And in the last election, why he kind of had that surge at the end that no one predicted was that young people came out and voted. So that if he can do that again and increase youth turnout even more so, Corbyn could have a bit of a surprise result. Because the more young people that come out, they're certainly not voting conservative in this election. A lot of them will vote Labour.
Okay, Pierre Blin says, I'm not hearing much about PR from the NDP. It seems that it's the most important thing that can happen. Couldn't the NDP make that their deal or no deal issue, electoral reform or nothing?
No, it's not going to work, guys. Look, the way this happened, and again, this is what I was saying about how like more of those 905 ridings going blue would have been better for us. Like, I'm being honest about that. I'm not trying to be like an edgelord here. Like, at the end of the day, the Liberals in this parliament have 157 seats. No two parties have enough to topple them. It would take the NDP and the Liberal and the Bloc and the Conservatives to topple this government, all three together. And so on what issues would that happen? Not electoral reform. It's not going to happen. It's not a priority issue. And yes, Singh could say to Trudeau, look, if you don't give us electoral reform, I will work with you on nothing. But then what about pharmacare? And what about a whole bunch of other stuff? Singh needs to hammer home the need for electoral reform. He did that in his election night speech. So it's not going away. But in terms of an ultimatum, the NDP is not in a position to make electoral reform an ultimatum. And again, I'm going to refer back to those numbers that I talked about in one of my recent videos, when it was asked to Canadians, what do you want to see the Liberals and NDP cooperate on? And electoral reform was on the list, but only 52% of Canadians supported it. 52 or 54. Whereas pharmacare, dental care, cell phone bills, taxing the rich, stopping fossil fuel subsidies, immediate end to the clean water, immediate action to help Indigenous people get clean water, all things the NDP ran on as well, have minimum 64% support. In some cases as high as 78, 79, 80%. Right? Like, that's the reality. And so at the end of the day, electoral reform is not the ultimatum. And here's the thing, guys. There was polling done, the polling I referenced on the outset here. The polling on the outset, the one that showed that all the party leaders are probably safe with the exception of Andrew Scheer, who may be in trouble. It also asked people, are you happy with this election outcome? And people aren't ecstatic, but they're not angry with it. We have to be honest with ourselves. Most Canadians do not want another election. And they asked people, this minority government, do you want to see the parties try to make it work, or do you want to see an immediate return to election? And well over 80% of Canadians said, make this thing work. And so Singh has to be very careful. He cannot be seen as willing to pull the plug right away over one issue. Rather, Singh has to work hard to make it look like Justin Trudeau is not the one cooperating. And to do that, the best way to do it, I feel, is to focus on those issues that have broad public support and broad support from the people who voted Liberal. And pharmacare, I think, is issue number one on that. It's coast to coast popular. Even in the places that voted true blue in Saskatchewan, if you poll average conservatives, they want universal pharmacare. They want it. So that's a good place to start. Electoral reform, that's not the issue. It's not. As much as I agree. And look, I talked about electoral reform nonstop for 4 years, but I just don't think it's going to be the issue that gets done in this minority parliament.
Okay, shout out to Lisa Hildebrand. Hey, Lisa. Oh, she said, everyone hit the like button. Good job. Thanks, Lisa,
guys,
for your support.
Thank you, Lisa, for the generous donation. I very much appreciate it. Again, if you guys hit the like button, apparently people have told me, apparently it helps bring more people to the stream. So that's great to see. So again, Lisa, thanks for your support and thanks for the reminder.
Okay. So Justin Frederick, apparently you guys have had a little tit for tat on Twitter.
You might call it.
Yeah, okay. Well, he says that he hopes he wasn't too hard on you. Anyway, he says, given that a united progressive party, Liberal and NDP, would have won 49% of the popular vote, what are your thoughts on a Liberal plus NDP merger as one party that advocates true progressive values?
I mean, I don't agree with that. I mean, I think that if you look at the key campaign promises, the key ones, there were differences. But what were the things the Liberals and Conservatives talked about most in this election, besides Trudeau saying he wasn't Scheer and Scheer saying he wasn't Trudeau? It was a tax cut, and it was getting those pipelines built. And Justin Trudeau's got a minority parliament. And what did he say were his first two priorities? A tax cut and getting those pipelines built. Justin Trudeau has a minority government where he could be working with the NDP, where 90% of his voters, 43% of whom were strategic voters, 90% of them say they want an NDP coalition. And what is Justin Trudeau doing? First of all, he's implementing policies that are very close to what Andrew Scheer wants. That indicates to me that the merger we would be talking about, if we're being realistic, is a Liberal-Conservative merger to merge the right. And I don't know if that's going to happen either, but I frankly see that as far more likely than an NDP Liberal merger. Look, in other parts, in any part of the country where the NDP has won more than one election, specifically British Columbia, Manitoba, and Saskatchewan, the merger has not been progressives against the merger of progressives to stop conservatives. It's been of conservatives and Liberals merging to stop the NDP. That's what the BC Liberal Party is. It's a merger of Liberals and Conservatives to stop the NDP. And that's what the Sask party is. It's a merger of liberals and conservatives to stop the NDP. And that's to a lesser degree because the Manitoba Liberals exist. But the PCs are largely a federal liberal, federal conservative merger to stop the NDP. That's what it's about. So in an alternative history where Tom Mulcair wins the election in 2015, you might see the federal Liberal Party disappear. The business liberals would be like, look, at the end of the day, we have disagreements with the conservatives, but they're better than the NDP. We're going to form a new, liberal democratic party. We're going to call ourselves that, and that merger would happen. So here's the thing. The average liberal voter, very similar to the NDP, but the Liberal Party structure is much closer to the conservatives than it is any other party, even the Greens, for instance. And so that's why I don't see that merger happening. I can understand the desire for it, but I just don't see it happening. Again, history tells us that a much more likely a merger is a liberal-conservative merger. Never before has the NDP and the Liberal Party merged anywhere in this country. It hasn't happened. But conservatives and liberals have merged in BC, in Saskatchewan, and to a lesser degree in Manitoba.
Okay, Studio Gallifrey says, if it weren't for the fact that the NDP and conservatives are in rough shape, I'd want them to call for a vote of no confidence in a pretty short amount of time.
Yeah, I mean, I could see the value in that. But as you note, the bloc, I'm not sure about the bloc's finances, guys. Let me know, actually. But the Greens and the NDP need to build up the war chest again. And if we're being honest here, the conservatives have the money. They probably have more money than Trudeau does right now, if we're being honest. But I think they're going to turf Scheer, guys. I don't know what you guys think. I certainly know it's possible. But I think Scheer's going to get turfed. I really do. Especially if Peter McKay is like, I'm ready to jump in. Like if they feel there's an alternative to Scheer and there's a kind of clear, I'm going to run as a relative moderate, real or perceived, alternative to Scheer. I think Scheer is done. I think he's done. And that's going to mean that the conservatives aren't going to be willing to call an election if they feel that this leader is potentially a lame duck. And again, the one reservation I have with that, though, guys, is that Singh is popular. He's the most popular leader right now in the country. But as that polling indicated, a vast majority of Canadians, a super majority of Canadians, an ultra majority, don't want another election right now. And so any party that's going to pull down the government has to do it for a damn good reason. And whether or not they feel it's a good reason, they also have to hope that Canadians will agree with them. And I have to say, guys, if Singh tried to pull the government down right now, he would look bad for it. Fair or not. It's not the wise move right now, given what Canadians want.
Okay, Sin Historia asked about a formal Liberal NDP coalition, but I think we just kind of covered that. So, Sin Historia, if you wanted to get into something more specific, please let me know in the comments.
For sure.
So Zachary says, why do you think so many voters decided to vote strategically last minute in the election?
A bunch of factors. One, it's like people don't understand how strategic voting works. And so in a lot of ridings, like I got to vote Liberal to stop conservatives. But it's like, well, actually in that riding, the Liberals and NDP are the only two competitive parties. Or in that riding, actually voting strategically for the Liberals elects a conservative, and on and on and on. I think some people worried about a conservative win so much that rational evaluation of strategic voting went out the door. I think that some people actually believed Andrew Scheer when he said he believes he'll win a majority. I think most of us knew he was lying. I knew he was lying. But at the end of the day, Andrew Scheer really did convince some people that he was right on that precipice, and that spooked people. And I think some people, fair or not, they feel that the NDP is and the Liberals are very similar, and so that, hey, we might as well just vote for Liberals. It's a safe option. And so I think all of those things really played a role in electing the Liberals last minute. So yeah, you're right. And I think strategic voters making their last minute decision makes the most sense, because if you really are a strategic voter, maybe you're waiting for the polls to solidify in your mind before you make that decision. And that would make some sense, because if you remember, the NDP had a big surge in that election. But that final week, they were still going up, but a lot slower. And so I thought maybe at that point, people were like, okay, the NDP's rise is sort of stalling. The Liberals and Conservatives are pretty consistent. I feel like I need to make my vote. Also, I think another factor is that people don't know how ridings work. And so what ended up happening was they saw that on the polling averages, the Conservatives were 1-2 points higher than the Liberals. And a lot of people interpreted that as, oh my God, Scheer's going to win the election. Little not realizing that all of the actual projections of who would get the most seats were leaning Liberal because they had better distribution of votes, in combination with the fact that Jagmeet Singh had said that he would support Justin Trudeau to keep Scheer out of power. None of that seemed to matter. And I think why a lot of people last minute shifted Liberal, even where they didn't have to.
Okay. So Justin Frederick sent a super chat. And thank you, Justin. And so he says that he's going to follow you and keep up the great work.
Well, thank you so much, Justin. I really appreciate that. And of course, we have heated discussions on Twitter sometimes. We have heated debates. But, Justin, I think that he offers good points. We don't have to agree with them. Of course, this is a channel where, I think most of my viewership probably say leans NDP or to the left of that. And we have a general viewpoint. But of course, as you know, I have people who identify as Liberals who come here occasionally, and Conservatives as well. PPCers, although they are more generally here as trolls, but although there probably are a couple legitimate ones. And so those people are welcome here.
Okay.
And thank you for the donation, Justin.
Okay. So Zachary says that his name is pronounced.
Are you gonna mispronounce it on the correction? Are you gonna
Galvin? No, Levine. Galvin.
Glavin?
Galvin. No, he said it's like Avril Lavigne, but with the G. Glavin.
Glavine?
This is just making it so much
okay,
worse.
Babe. Okay, Zachary, I am so sorry. I'm so sorry, Zachary. I'm sorry we've done this to you.
I practiced that in my head.
I'm so sorry.
I said it out loud.
I'm so sorry.
Okay, I'm just gonna refer to.
This is mostly Brianna's fault.
Just stop talking. Okay, Zachary, you will now be the Zachary, and that's it. No one else will be Zachary.
The Zachary.
Okay.
Everyone else will be Z if they are Zacharys.
And now I can't.
Or Z if they are Canadian Zacharys.
Any more questions? There's one from Drew. I know there's one from Drew. Oh, okay. Sin Historia says, my point was more about how the junior partner in a coalition often gets slaughtered in the election afterwards.
Yeah, that often is a concern. I've never studied that like religiously. Like I don't know of like what the exceptions are, but you're right. Like so for instance, the Lib Dems in Britain in like I think 2010 formed a coalition with the Conservatives, and they ended up breaking a lot of their promises in that coalition, and they didn't really get all that they wanted, and it ended up happening that they took a big beating in the last election where in the next one, and they lost a lot of seats. And it wasn't a formal coalition, but one of the examples given is in 1972, the NDP had a good election, held the balance of power. For 2 years, they got a lot of policy out of Pierre Trudeau. They got a lot of concession from the Trudeau Liberals. But when 1974 came around, Trudeau returned to a majority, and the NDP lost half the caucus. Now, to be fair, they only lost 2% of the vote. They lost 2% of the vote, but half the caucus, because they were unlucky where those vote losses happened. But at the end of the day, it was an example where a lot of things happened that the NDP were proud about, but they got punished by the voters regardless.
Okay, I'm still suffering from that embarrassing feeling.
Brianna is like, she looks so dejected. I'm like, what's wrong, babe? Are you okay? Do we need to like...
Moving on. Arthur says, thoughts on first past the post in regards to the UK Labour benefits from first past the post there.
Yeah, I mean, look, there are places in this country where the NDP benefits from first past the post. Like, look, Manitoba's election didn't go the way we wanted, but Craig here, who played, I don't know if Craig's still here, but Craig's an on-the-ground expert in Manitoba, and he, I believe, managed a Manitoba provincial campaign, so he knows way more than I do. But he'll tell you, and many people know, that the NDP can win majority governments in Manitoba, losing the popular vote, because the Tories will win the non-northern rural parts by massive margins. And the NDP will win the downtown core very heavily. But if the NDP can eke out close victories in the Winnipeg suburbs, they win majority governments and they could lose the popular vote. And so first past the post is broken. And honestly, yeah, Labour benefits from it in Britain. And there are certain parts of the country where the NDP benefit from it. But at the end of the day, it's still an unjust system and it needs to go. That's really my fundamental view. I really do feel that it just needs to go. And honestly, I think the next NDP government that gets elected should just do it. They should just do it. If the Greens ever form a government, they should just do it. No referendum, just friggin' do it. Mixed member proportional or single transferable vote, not ranked ballot. Often people call that ranked ballot. Not alternative vote, not ranked ballot. Either single transferable vote or mixed member proportional. Just do it. Like honestly.
Okay, Drew M asks, I'm not sure if it's been asked yet, but to which ministry do you think Freeland will be appointed?
That's a good question. I mean, I think she's very clearly lined up to be Trudeau's successor. As I've noted on the channel, the Liberal Party, since the days of Laurier, have always gone French, English in their leadership, excluding interim leaders, of course. And so Trudeau is considered a francophone. The next leader will likely be anglophone. And so Freeland fits there. And the Liberal Party is the only party to have been exclusively led by white men. So it would be kind of nice if they didn't have another white male leader. Even the Conservatives for a while had the token Kim Campbell leadership. So the Liberals are the least diverse party in federal history in terms of its leadership selections. So I think she's lined up for leader, but I wonder where she's going to go. On the one hand, they might just leave her where she is. Her role is important, and she's perceived as of doing a good job. Whether or not you think she's done a good job or I think she's done a good job, I think she's actually very problematic. Whether it's her family's connection to far-right nationalism in Ukraine, or whether it's how she's legitimized Bolsonaro, or she's helped legitimize Trump. Like, there's a lot of issues with Freeland, but I think that she's going to be in a key role, and I think that she's probably going to have some input on that role is. She's incredibly important to Justin Trudeau, and she's very powerful. And again, less credible than the Peter McKay rumors. But there were some rumors about Chrystia Freeland lining herself up or being lined up by some of her supporters should Justin Trudeau fail in this election. So she's a big cog in that liberal machine. And I think that she's going to play a big role. I don't know where she'll go. If she wants to stay where she is, I assume she will. I mean, I don't know if he'll make a Minister of Finance. I mean, I assume Bill Morneau might stay on as Minister of Finance. Like, cabinet shuffles happen. But if you recall, Paul Martin was Minister of Finance for Jean Chrétien for years and years and years across elections. And so I think you might try to find some stability there. A mixture of get new people in new roles, shift some people around, but also let's keep some of the key people where they are. Like, don't rock the boat unless you need to in certain portfolios. I think that would be a prudent decision.
Okay, Zachary says I'm forgiven and that it's pronounced Glavine. So I feel better now. Okay. I'm
so sorry, Zachary, for all of that.
I know. I'm so embarrassed. Thank God no one can see my face. No one knows what I look like. Okay. I'm going to read you the next question.
Yeah, I'm looking up the TFC score, guys.
No, someone will just tell us. You need to pay attention.
Oh, it's 1-1 at the 45th minute. Okay, that's good.
I'm gonna read the next question, and I want a measured academic response.
Okay, guys, this is a test. We're gonna see what happens here.
Okay.
We're gonna see.
Claudia Holding says, some people have called for Notley to be expelled from the NDP because of their support of the pipeline. What do you think? Okay, here's my position. The way Notley has acted with regard to the rest of the NDP is unacceptable. BC staff and BC volunteers went to help her get elected in 2015. And she did not return the favor in 2017.
I've told the story more than once about how we had a very pro, and I have the one of the books here, the Party of Conscience book. Some of you have read it. I've mentioned it. We had a conference to present the papers that would turn into that book in Alberta. In 2017, I think we had that conference. We had it there. And it was very much a pro-NDP group. Some of us on the left of the party, but none of us doing explicitly critical work of Notley. And the party figures were banned from attending our conference. Rachel Notley basically said for much of this election that she wasn't going to vote NDP. And despite all that, Jagmeet still tried to be conciliatory towards her, saying, we have disagreements, but I still support her. Rachel Notley has been disloyal to the NDP, and it's goddamn unacceptable. She should be gone as NDP leader. I really believe that. That's my view. She needs to go. And anybody who's like a hardcore Notley loyalist within her shadow cabinet, they need to go too. I really believe that. Fundamentally. She shouldn't be expelled, though. I don't think that's the right way to do things. I think the way you get rid of Rachel Notley, unfortunately, has to be the Alberta members have to do it. The Alberta NDP, whether it's her caucus or whether it's the rank and file members of the ANDP or a combination of both, they have to be the ones to decide that. And unfortunately, the Alberta NDP in that province is hooked onto the tar sands, doomsday cult just as much as the UCP seems to be. And I don't know if we're going to break that. I don't see expulsion as feasible. And some people have debated whether or not that can work, whether or not the expulsion would have to come from the provincial side. It's really tricky. I'm not exactly sure what the goal is. And it also raises other questions. I tried to get an answer out of this on Twitter today from someone where I basically said, okay, you believe that, but should the Canadian Labour Congress, for instance, expel every union that supports pipelines? Should a union, an industrial union that has certain locals within it that support pipelines, should they expel those locals? Should locals from a union that supports pipelines, but they don't, leave their union? And I didn't really get a straight answer. And so my view is that as important as that issue is to our party and is to the survival of our species, I don't know if expulsion would serve the proper goal at this moment, regardless of my views on Rachel Notley and her large, in some ways, her, and I use this word with all sincerity, betrayal of the party.
Okay. Vahab says, does Jagmeet have actual power to direct the NDP, or is there a long-lasting leadership team that directs every leader? Would they be involved in resisting more progressive policies?
The federal party leader has quite a bit of power, but of course the people around them, be they, their caucus mates and the staff of the party, have immense power in terms of influencing them, on directions to take. I think that in many ways, this election has made the NDP Jagmeet's party. A lot of people are gone now, people who didn't run again, and some people who lost their seat. And a lot of the people left over are going to be loyal to Jagmeet. Jagmeet also, as any leader does, tends to be able to kind of hire and fire their own staff, at least at the key level. Now, the NDP, for rank and file staff, they're unionized. So there's clear procedures about termination and laying off people and hiring people, but that doesn't apply to the national leadership. Most leaders sort of get to pick their own team. And so there could be a debate about whether or not Jagmeet's team is the right team or progressive enough, or whether they're too much connected to the old party establishment. But I feel that the direction Jagmeet Singh has moved the party in is a positive one, even if it's not as fast as we would like. And I feel that the team he's built has done a good job at implementing his vision, and with very, very, very little money and resources to do so. And I think that in terms of how he's moved the party, I don't think that I don't think he's being hamstrung by a secretive cabal of paid staffers. Now, of course, are there times where he might face disagreements within his caucus? Yeah, that might happen. And Jagmeet, like any leader, including Justin Trudeau and others, has to balance the fact that they are the boss, but that they also run a team. and those issues are going to rise up. I don't know where and on what issues and in what ways, but those things will happen. We might not hear about them all the time, but they will happen.
Okay, Robin Hood says there's a perception that the Conservative Party is fiscally responsible while the NDP will create a deficit. Is there any truth to this belief?
Not strictly. I mean, one of the barriers to the political mindset, and the media perpetuates this, the political parties do, and frankly, like regular Canadians do, is we don't see tax cuts as spending, but tax cuts are spending. Whether you spend $1 investing in dental care or whether you spend $1 giving a tax cut, that's $1 of spending. And in some ways, many have argued, I think effectively, that it makes more sense to invest that dollar than simply, throw it to a Canadian. And I don't want to downplay the fact that, giving a Canadian, especially a low-income Canadian, some money can have positive economic and social effects. But I think like there's a lot of things to say that when we invest in healthcare and education, we see the best bang for our buck. Like $1 invested in healthcare and education often has a big multiplier effect, especially as we, go forward into the long term. And so a lot of people assume that because the Conservatives, say they're going to cut taxes and cut spending, that makes them fiscally responsible. But what often happens is that even when they do cut spending, it's never by enough to balance out their tax cuts. So for instance, in the Ontario 2018 election, an analysis done by somebody who is likely leans liberal in his support, not a formal liberal, but you might call him like a liberal supporter in ideological terms, did an independent analysis, not affiliated to any party, that showed that over the 4-year governments of Ford and Wynne and Horwath, like the hypothetical 4-year governments, the Conservatives would run the biggest deficit, the Liberals in the middle, and then the NDP with the smallest deficits. And that's because although we do raise spending, the NDP is open about that. The NDP often balances that out with increasing taxes. And so, yeah, dental care is expensive. And yeah, pharmacare is expensive. And yeah, childcare is expensive. And yeah, freezing student loan interest will have a cost. But at the end of the day, it can be at least partially balanced out by things like capital gains tax increases, wealth tax creations, and on and on and on. And I think that the NDP needs to try to do a better job at explaining this to people. But I honestly think like the media needs to do a far better job at classifying tax cuts as spending increases, because that's what they are.
Okay, Zachary again says, do you think Trudeau will go to the bloc for the confidence vote?
In terms of the first vote, like the speech from the throne, like that first vote, I assume what will happen, I'm not exactly sure what's going to happen with that. I assume Trudeau's just going to put something on and people are going to pass it or not pass it. What he's going to do vote to vote is Trudeau's probably going to sit down with his team, his advisors and his caucus and say, okay, here's piece of legislation 1, the tax cut. How do we sell it so that we can get at least one other party on board? Because for Liberals to pass any piece of legislation, they only need one of the Conservatives, the NDP, or the Bloc. Only one of those parties, right? They only need one. And so they just need to find a party there. So for instance, on a tax cut, they might find support from the Conservatives, or on the pipeline. They're not going to get that support from the Bloc and the NDP on pipeline issues, for instance. But will they be able to go to the Bloc on issues that matter specifically to Quebec? Perhaps. And then even if the NDP or Conservatives are reluctant, and then could they go to the NDP on, let's say, pharmacare or on or something like that, even though the Conservatives are against it, or maybe the Bloc doesn't really care that much because Quebecers already have something of a system of pharmacare. And so the Liberals have great flexibility in this parliament. It's a minority government, so they still have to be careful. But the nature of it is that they have 3 parties that they can get support from. This is why this minority government might last